I'm Linda Elsegood, founder of the LDN Research Trust. It has been my honour to interview LDN researchers, prescribers, pharmacists and patients from around the world for many conditions. Thank you for joining us.
I'd like to introduce Pat from England, who takes LDN for fibromyalgia. It's also helped with her pain, fatigue, hormone balance, depression and skin. Thank you for joining us, Pat.
Hello, welcome.
Could you tell us when you first noticed there was something wrong with you?
I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia in my mid-20s, but that was after a number of years of sort of suffering, pain, fatigue, and of course none of the tests that the doctors, the general sort of tests that they do, nothing comes back with it. And it wasn't until I actually went in there one day after having a particularly bad day at work, but doing a lot of kind of repetitive clicking and things. And I went in. I thought I might have had RSI, and it was a doctor I'd never seen before, and he sort of quite quickly said, "Well, I believe you have fibromyalgia," and did the pressure point test. But he got halfway through it, at which point I was sort of like on the floor in so much. He says, I'm fairly confident that you've got fibromyalgia. Once you've got a kind of diagnosis, you can work with it. It kind of the symptoms that you've been experiencing, which the worst one was sort of general pain, not being able to sort of raise my arms, sort of be on the vertical, but other sort of symptoms, sort of memory, short-term memory loss, and just sort of general fatigue, and always, even as a sort of teenager, I'd sort of been inclined to sort of anxiety, and I think when you're in sort of chronic pain, you get depressed. You can't help it really, just because you're working with pain all the time. And the treatment generally there has been a kind of a selection of different painkillers and different antidepressants. And I'd say that sort of started in my mid-20s, and it pretty much continued like that for a couple of decades. I'm now 49. But what kind of made me think I've got to try something else? Because although I was sort of able to work, I kind of go to only working part time. By the time I'd sort of worked, got home, fed myself, done my animals, there was just nothing left. The prospect of perhaps going out for an evening meal or joining a club was just that was just impossible. And anyway, 5 years ago, I after a routine test, it was discovered I had the early signs of endometrial cancer, and I had to have surgical menopause, had to have the uterus and ovaries out, and I was suffering quite bad postmenopausal symptoms, even with estrogen HRT. I'd sort of begun to feel older than my years, and round about that time as well, my mother developed giant cell arthritis, and I started researching treatments for that, and this is when I first came across LDN, which was about 4 years ago. And I remember discussing it with my mother then, and she sort of said, well, it's probably a bit too late for me, dear, but perhaps it's something you can look into for yourself. Well, one thing or another, my mum deteriorated, she passed away, I then became a dad's carer, and he passed away about 2 years ago. It didn't actually at that point feel the right time to sort of try and change things. I was surviving on basically tramadol and citalopram and paracetamol. I started changing the diet as well, and I found that sort of helped a bit. But I sort of towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, and I was struggling with my symptoms, and I just thought there's got to be something else. And that's when I started looking into the LDN again, and I just thought I'd got to the point I couldn't really face decades of just taking painkillers and antidepressants and them not really working properly and still being in pain. I just thought there's got to be, I've got to try something else. I've got to try something else. And that's when I took the plunge and thought, well, I'll get myself down to a sort of a minimum amount of painkillers. And although I had discussed it with an old GP that who I'd known for many, many years, she retired. And when I spoke to her, the surgery wasn't prescribing it, and she spoke to the rheumatology department of the local hospital, and there was, well, we can't recommend it, but we would be interested, if you do get it, what results you get. Well, that's not terribly helpful. So anyway, I mean, I think I've done what a lot of people in the UK have done when they don't have any success with their GP, which is getting it through Clinic 158, which is based in Glasgow, which is a telephone conversation. You send evidence of your diagnosis. And so that would have been around sort of April, May time. And I got my bottle of LDN. The first 24 hours, started on just 0.5 milligrams a night. First 24 hours, body kind of felt like, what on earth are you doing to me now? You're trying to suppress things most of the time, and now it feels like you're trying to wake everything up. But on the second day, so sort of 48 hours after my first dose, I suddenly had like a bit of get up and go. And which was quite a nice surprise and very quick. I wasn't really expecting any results so quickly as that. Pain was still there, and in some ways was slightly more acute, but my mood was so much improved that I was better able to cope with it, if you know what I mean. And after a couple of weeks, I noticed that my dry skin, which, you know, because with the sort of lack of hormones and everything, had, when I smiled, it didn't feel like my face was about to crack, and other issues, let's say, it wasn't just my skin that was dry. Let's say other physical symptoms seemed to sort of improve. And I thought, well, that's a bit of a bonus. I still take my HRT. And anyway, after probably about a month, I had about 5 weeks. I caught a very bad cold, which I think, well, from what I've read, probably isn't that uncommon that you get sort of some sort of cold or virus. And that seemed to be the turning point with the pain. After that, I suddenly noticed that the pain was quite dramatically reduced. And so I thought, well, I can start cutting down on my painkillers now. So over the last sort of few months, I'm now down on that way. I have maybe one tramadol every other day.
Wow.
Wow. And I was on 3 a day, which was when I started, which I was quite pleased to get myself down to that. So I'm kind of almost at a loss for words as to just how much a difference it has made to everything. I've joined a club, an art club, which I go out to in the evenings. I mean, that, a year ago, that I would have probably just laughed if someone said, "Oh yes, you'll get home, you'll rush around, do all the." My house is my house isn't a lot tidier because I'm an untidy person, but it's a lot cleaner, and I've been decorating. I've been able to do things that, like I say, 6 months ago would have been just so beyond my grasp.
Well, that's amazing. Especially,
it really is.
If you've had this pain since you were, well, it must have been a teenager.
Yeah.
When you started with the pain, so that
Yeah.
must have impacted on everything. in your
Oh,
life?
it has. I mean, even my work colleagues have noticed the difference in me, that I'm sort of cracking jokes and things. And admittedly, the last couple of years, going through sort of bereavement and things, I probably have been pretty sort of miserable. But even before that, I've always been, the sort of person, because just everything feels, it's such an effort. My worst problem is muscle spasms. And, so sort of, even if I'll be in quite a lot of pain, I'd make myself go to work and, just walking across the office, you get a muscle spasm and I'd sort of, my legs would go. And I used to have what I call pain-induced Tourette's, because the kind of the expletives that would come out because muscle spasms are awful, there's no getting away. It's either scream, cry, or say rude words, and
or
rude
all
words
three.
or all three. I just can't. What I think is, I can't understand why this isn't prescribed more on the NHS. From what I've read, I believe it could save them billions.
Exactly. If we could go back to before you started LDN,
Yeah.
if you'd had to have scored your quality of life on a score of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, what would you have said it would have been?
I would say about a 4.
Mm-hmm.
I could get up in the mornings, I could go to work, I could come home, but everything I was doing was probably the minimum, and it was wiping me out. So I'd say about a 4.
Okay.
I was sort of existing rather than living.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say it is now?
I'd say it's up to an 8 or a 9.
Well, that's amazing, isn't it?
Physical activity. I've always believed with the fibromyalgia that if you sit and do nothing, well, if I sit still, you hurt. So I figure if I'm going to hurt, I might as well try and do some exercise. So, I noticed I kind of do a small amount of cycling every day. I drive to our park and ride, and then cycle from that car park into work, which is only about 1.5 miles. And again, within a couple of weeks of taking the LDM, what was a very laborious struggle of a cycle, I'd have old gentlemen and things would overtake me, and toddlers on postcard, but, so I'd get there and I felt quite pleased that I was able to do that. Within a couple of weeks of LDN, my muscles, I think with fibromyalgia, it kind of prevents your muscles working properly, whether it's something in the mitochondria or whatever. It doesn't actually allow you to use the full strength that you've got. And I found I was, really being able to push the pedals round and going somewhere. And, the day I overtook a schoolboy cycling, so I was like, wow, I've overtaken someone. I'm never going to be a sports cyclist or whatever, but the improvement in everything and in cognitive function as well. I'm just sharper and more on the ball. The fibre fog has virtually gone. I am very, very strict with my diet. I don't have any wheat or gluten because I started to develop intolerances to those. Again, about 5 years back, it was after I had all the surgery for the endometrial, and I've now given up. I eat very little fruit because I find that makes the pain worse. So I tend to have low salicylate foods, and the last few months, because when I spoke to the doctor about getting LDN, he did say to try and go dairy free. And the last couple of months, I thought, well, I'll give it a go. I loved cheese and things like that. And I thought this is going to be hard. I must admit, I like not having dairy now. And from what I understand, that's supposed to be good for if you've got sort of autoimmune issues. And my biggest regret is that I didn't discover LDN 20 years ago. because, I just think I could have done so much more. But I'm just so pleased that I have found it, and actually feel that I've got a life that's worth living, that is actually a life now, not just an existence, just being able to get through the day. I can actually do things and just feel so much more positive. And my next step is to try and cut down on the antidepressants. That'll be, I've tried cutting down on them before. They're not nice to come off of. So that will be a long-term aim. It may involve, just shaving little bits off, but I just can't fault the LDN. I've had so few symptoms. The only thing I will say is, although I've been prescribed up to 4.5 mil, I can't really get much over 3 milligrams. So I find that it disrupts my sleep a little bit too much. So I take about 2.8 mil. I seem to find seems to be my optimum level at the moment. If I start getting symptoms again, I may fiddle around with the dose again, or maybe try taking during the day. But I'm sticking with the taking it at night at the moment, and I'm just so happy I found it.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Pat, for
That's
sharing
quite
your
all right.
experience with us. And maybe you'll send us some pictures of your artwork one day.
Yes, I will.
Do you have LDN experience to share? If so, please email me, linda@ldnrt.org. I look forward to hearing from you.